Welcome to Arden's Neurodiversity podcast. This is Arden's third year celebrating Brain Awareness Week, which is a global campaign held every March focused on encouraging interest and support for brain science. This year we're exploring the concept of neurodiversity and we'll be interviewing a variety of individuals to explore just how diverse our brains can be and how that impacts our experiences. Our podcast will cover a diverse range of experiences that might cover stigma, personal struggles, or potentially triggering subjects. Some of these terms that we use might be unfamiliar, so we're going to quickly go over them right now. Neurodiversity is the understanding that neurocognitive diversity is a valuable part of biodiversity. Different ways of thinking, viewing, and experiencing the world contribute to our wider society, and there is no normal or ideal way to be. Neurodivergence is a term to differentiate those who deviate from the norm in their neurocognitive type without using medicalized deficit model language. Neurotypical doesn't mean neurologically privileged, but it does mean the world is set up to cater for this neurotype by default. It's important to note that self-diagnosis is valid and many undiagnosed people will have unmet needs, so a lack of diagnosis doesn't mean that someone's neurotypical by default. Okay, so today we're speaking with a psychology lecturer, Lucia Anacleto. Did you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. As you said, I'm Luciana Cleto, and I am part of the psychology department at Arden University, and I'm also the program lead for the PG Cert in neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is something that's been very much of interest to me for a long time, and yeah, I'll explain a bit more about that as we go through the questions.
Yeah, that leads into our first one then. We'll already have gone through the basic definitions, but what does neurodivergence mean to you? And what does what is your neurodivergence?
Okay. Well, for me, neurodivergence, I think, obviously, like with the definitions that you've already talked about, I think it's really important that it is seen as an umbrella term, because there is so much co-occurrence between all the conditions, and because every person who is neurodivergent is obviously unique. So I really like that way of thinking about the umbrella term. And I think also for me, partly because of my background and the way that I grew up, I've always identified a lot with the positive elements around neurodiversity. And so for me, before there was kind of a term that covered that, it just felt very, very lacking and negative, I guess. And so to actually have a term which embraces the positive elements of neurodiversity has been something really empowering and important, I think, for me. And in terms of neurodivergence for myself, I haven't ever had a formal diagnosis of neurodivergence. I struggled throughout school with a lot of symptoms that are very much linked to dyslexia, but have never sort of had sufficient, I guess, in terms of the diagnostic criteria to be diagnosed with that. And there's also other traits linked to autism and ADHD that I can very much identify with. But again, because of the parameters of a formal diagnosis, I've never had that diagnosis. And so I can relate to the different elements of different conditions, and also have a child with dyspraxia and autism, and a son as well with undiagnosed autism. So that's something that I've experienced a lot with them both, sort of throughout their lives as well.
Yeah, the I quite like that neurodiversity feels kind of more like a cultural
Mm-hmm.
exploration than a medical one, and being recognized by people like you is more important, I think, than getting a diagnosis from someone that doesn't understand the experience. That's why
Absolutely.
self-diagnosis is so important
Yes.
to recognize.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And because yeah, the parameters are quite specific, aren't they? And that doesn't necessarily fit with
Mm.
human variance.
So you mentioned the like some difficulties you had when you were in school.
Mm.
How would you say, divergence impacts you on a daily basis or throughout your academic roles?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I guess sort of in terms of over a longer period, it definitely had a huge impact on my confidence academically, um, and yeah, so I think that was something that's always been around. It's something that I understand a lot better now. So, um, but certainly impacted me a lot through my schooling and earlier education. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it can really impact in terms of organization and um, and one thing that I can do well is be very hyper focused and achieve a lot in a very short space of time. But I feel like wherever there are periods of hyper focus, there's an expansion, there's always a contraction afterwards. And then there's always a feeling of exhaustion and lack of motivation to to get on and do tasks at a more sort of reasonable pace after that. So I'm aware of those sort of contrasting elements of being able to do a lot, but then having a period where I can't. So that's something that definitely impacts me, and something that I try to sort of compensate for, I guess, as well. Um, but I would say that that's probably the main thing in terms of like my work and um, in like in academia, for instance, and yeah, and just the way I organize. I need to find ways that I can organize myself that are manageable and achievable, um, because there's definitely an element of I just have to achieve everything, and otherwise
Mm.
it's not an achievement. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yes.
Um, what are some of the ways that you manage that kind of like almost like incompatible drives or like needs that you have there?
um well, I guess, I've mentioned about how um obviously I'm program lead and things, but the another area of my life is that I'm a psychotherapist, and I've found that sort of a lot of work on myself and sort of learning, having a lot more awareness about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and has really helped. So I'm a lot more aware that, oh yeah, I'm doing that again, so that I can kind of stop in my tracks more than in the past. It was just completely unconscious. I wasn't aware that I was doing that. Um, so having that sort of level of awareness, that has taken a lot of time, and a lot of sort of reflection, working with myself to sort of identify, um, like if I'm under a lot of stress, for instance, that I'm more likely to sort of fall into ways that are not particularly productive or good for me. So things like that um, have have really helped, um, and just reminding myself, to sort of make my workload manageable,
Mm.
that kind of thing as well, instead of taking on too much, which I think previously I would have done that very easily.
Yeah, that sounds like pacing, which they use in like communities for people with physical chronic illness, where
Mm,
you like
yes.
you manage your workload and you kind of respect that resting and taking it easy is a job that you have to do and it's important and has value.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we grow a lot of us grow up thinking that we're lazy or being told that, so having to change that mindset is very difficult, but
Hmm.
is very rewarding. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think just learning about the importance of self-care as well, that
Mm.
it's not indulgent, it's an essential part of being healthy, and yeah, making sure that that is built into everything that I do as well.
Mm.
And I don't do it perfectly all the time, but I work towards it definitely all the time.
Yeah, if I'm struggling at self-care, I just think, okay, well, that's telling me where I'm at. That's useful information.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. And I think, yeah, noticing that, being able to be curious about what's going on rather than critical about yourself can make a really big difference as well.
So, moving on to the more positive side, what are some joys of having a neurodivergent mind?
Well, I think for me, the main thing is about being creative,
Mm.
um, being in every way really, whether that's creative thinking or just, yeah, just being creative. And I think although there are downsides to being able to have hyper focus, there's also a joy in that, and being able to sort of um, think about a lot of really complicated things um, at the same time and in a short space of time is something that I do enjoy. Um, and and I know it's cliche, but kind of thinking outside the box as well, I think is
Mm.
definitely um, a joy. And I know with my own family as well, that that's something that I see in them as well. The definitely the creative element. But I think also there's a real sense of that I've seen in a lot of other people too, but can also identify with, is being very empathetic, um, and yeah, I see that a lot in my own children as well, um,
Mm.
and and having that sort of deeper understanding for what it might be like for other people, and what's going on for other people, and that's something that I really value, and also that I see in them too, that I value in them.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite an asset for your role as a therapist and a researcher, because you're coming from a perspective that um, the majority of past researchers didn't necessarily have insight into.
Hmm. Yes, yeah, yeah, I think so. I think it's always a reminder to focus on the human element of whatever you are researching, and of course, obviously, researching neurodiversity, then that's a really important focus of any of the research that we do.
So, do you feel connected to the neurodivergent or disabled community? I know you're not diagnosed, but you connect with a diverse amount of neurotypes.
Hmm. Well, I guess I've had quite an unusual upbringing in that my parents started a community for adults with learning difficulties at the time, as that's what it was called.
Mm.
Um, and and so I had the unique experience of living alongside um, for my whole childhood, um, with different adults with different conditions, and and because of when it was, a lot of those people were not really accepted in society. And so I had that experience of the idea of the community was to sort of be a bridging that gap, so that many of the people who lived there could then actually get jobs and be more integrated into the community. So I was very aware of all the stigma and everything that was very much around, and I've always felt a real connection, and can really see the value and the importance of having community where there are places that you do feel accepted and have that sense of belonging. So so I think I've always looked for that, whether it's through friendships or groups or whatever. I've always looked for that because I know how valuable and how important it is, and definitely do have that. And I think that we're also building that at Arden as well through the neurodiversity network and the research groups that we have. And I think it's really important to have that wherever you work or study or whatever, because they're such big parts of your life and you spend so much of your time doing it. So it's really important to have those places where you can feel like you belong and have that connection.
Did you want to take this moment to tell us a little bit about the Neurodiversity Network?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we set up the Neurodiversity Network a couple of years ago, and the idea was that it would be a space for staff members and students to come together who are neurodivergent, but also a place just if you're interested in neurodiversity, want to find out some more. So it was not a criteria that you have to be neurodivergent to join. But yeah, that was the main idea, just to sort of come together and meet regularly. And it was kind of twofold. So on the one hand, it was about offering support to anybody who's neurodivergent, but also to sort of influence any sort of policies that were at the university and help to improve, anything. So in terms of students, that student experience would be improved via things that we did in the neurodiversity network. And some of the examples were that, like, when the inclusion team was being first started, that a lot of the things that they were setting up, we looked over those in the neurodiversity network to sort of see how accessible things were, what things they might need to add, that kind of thing, and sort of having that input and say on important things across the university. So that's been really positive as well. But we also realised that another element that was important was research, and so sort of alongside that, and as a bit of an offshoot, we set up the neurodiversity network research group, which again, obviously you're part of as well, and a smallish group of students and staff members who were interested in doing research on neurodiversity at Arden, because we really wanted to find out more about the experiences of our students and also of staff members, so that we could improve even more, what is offered to students, and make the university a much more inclusive place, but also for staff members as well. So that was really important for us, and the research that we're actually working on at the moment it's looking at students' experiences of neurodiversity, being a student at Arden who's neurodivergent, but we're also looking at neurodivergent staff members, so also interested to find out about their experiences and what support they might feel they need, or what things they feel are done well. But also we wanted the experiences of all neurotypical staff members as well, just so we could see what sort of things they feel they need as well to support students and other staff members. And the research that we're doing, we've started it off with questionnaires for all these different groups, and then we are hoping to go on to host a series of interviews and also forums to get some more qualitative data about the actual experiences of different individuals across the organisation. And off the back of that, we hope to put together a toolkit that will then be accessed by anybody who's interested across the university, staff and students. So it'll be a place that they can get help, find out more about things, and that might be, you know, for a staff member who wants to know how to put together a presentation, for instance, that is accessible, or it might be for a student who's looking at advice about reasonable adjustments. It'll be different things, but based on the information that we gather from the research that we're doing. I don't know if I've missed anything there, or if there's anything else you think that I need to add in there, or that you can think we need to add.
Yeah, I think that's everything. I was just thinking of how ambitious of a project it is because even if we were just looking at students, it's international. So we've got a lot of some people will be entitled to DSA, but others won't. So we'd have to account for all these different types of needs. Obviously, in some countries, it's easier to get diagnosed than in others. So
Mm-hmm.
even the concept of neurodiversity is potentially different across different countries, and um, yeah, I I think it's a really exciting piece of research. I'm really looking forward to seeing um, what the results are and how much of a change we can make. And I just think it's great that staff are being included in this because one thing I've noticed with things like dyslexia and autism and different needs like that, they're framed as like educational needs and
Mm.
like you kind of will grow out of it once you're
Yes.
working or something. And university you do get quite a bit more support, but then often most neurodivergent or disabled students are like, well, am I going to get this when I leave? So seeing like it in action that that it's equally important to manage the neurodivergent needs of individuals across all roles is a very powerful one, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to representation is really important, isn't it, across all different areas. And it is an ambitious project, and really exciting, and we have a really great team, of very committed individuals. So I'm sure we're gonna pull it off, and it will be a great um, piece of research. But we do still need participants, and so we are still looking for people to participate. And there's been a lot of different places that it's been promoted. But if anybody wants any more information or would like to take part, then they can get in touch. Or I don't know if there'll be any links you can add um, around Brain Awareness Week anyway. But otherwise they can contact us on the Neurodiversity Network Research Group, um, and that's at arden.ac.uk as well.
Yeah, I believe the link will be for the neurodiversity network at the very least will be on the poster, so people will be able to
Okay.
access that.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
yeah.
Brilliant.
So um, going back to the concept of identifying as neurodivergent, how did you find out that you were neurodivergent, if that's the right terminology? I know some people with neurodivergent children start seeing it at that point when their child's getting diagnosed, but other people were just always aware that they were a little bit different and there just wasn't a term for it. So what was your experience?
Yeah, good question. I mean, at school, I mean, I went to a Steiner school, and there were a lot of children in my class who had who were neurodivergent and hadn't succeeded in other schools, and so they were sent to the Steiner school. And so, for instance, like in my classroom, like the whole of the front row would be for people who were dyslexic because there were so many. But dyslexia was really the only thing that was talked about in terms of neurodiversity at school.
Oh, wow.
And I knew that my condition was not as severe as the people who were like in the class. I was aware of that. So I didn't like think, oh, I must be dyslexic. I just thought that I think initially I just thought there was something wrong with me, or I wasn't clever enough. So I think I wasn't aware of it at school. I was aware there was some difference, like learning to read very late and those kind of things, but not that it was a condition. And I think dyslexia was anyway quite poorly understood at the time, and it was sort of very specific that you jumble up your letters. That was kind of all that all there was talked about. So I didn't really identify with that, and so it was only much later, as neurodiversity became something that was talked about a lot more, that I started to think about it. And like you said, as also when you start to identify things in your own children, that's also another time when I definitely thought about it more. So yes, I think there was some initial thoughts there growing up, but not thinking, oh, this is neurodiversity. It was just like an awareness that there was something different. And then more so when neurodiversity was talked about more, and also with my children when they've had diagnoses.
Yeah, I think it sounds like when the medical model was used for neurodiversity,
Mm.
it focuses so much on severity that a lot of us will be like, well, guess I can't be that because I'm not bad enough.
Yes,
And
yeah.
then when we do look at it from a more I don't know, human sort of standpoint, just of this is the different ways of neurotypes you can have.
Mm.
It just opens up the capacity for, well, I can identify with these people and we have similar struggles, and there's never was supposed to be a sort of fight on who has it worse. And
Yes, yeah.
like how bad your symptoms get does depend on stress anyway, so it's not really like you function the same way all the time. It, it's a strange, the medical model for it's very strange. It
It
doesn't work
is.
across a lifetime, does it really?
No, it really doesn't. And I think, like you were saying, I think because I grew up in this home with a lot of adults who had a lot of them had autism, but it was definitely sort of the severe end of the spectrum. That to me, that's what autism was. I didn't have another example of it, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, so I didn't identify with that, or the experiences that I'd seen.
Yeah, I was quite similar. It was only when my brother got diagnosed that I was like, he's not too different from me, and he understands social stuff better than me. Um,
Yes, yeah.
so, what is the value of being diagnosed or, self-diagnosing, with neurodivergence, if any?
Um, I mean, I think for me, the main value in having a formal diagnosis is is for other people, because I think you can spend a lifetime explaining yourself to people, and that is difficult, and sometimes it's easier to just be able to say, give your diagnosis. And I think, for example, something that I've come across a lot, especially with my children, is how difficult it is to get any support. And if you don't have a diagnosis, it's much harder, even though you should still be able to get that help. It just makes it a lot harder if you have no diagnosis. So I think in that sense, it can be helpful. And I think self-diagnosis is important because it's like we've said, there's quite rigid parameters around what is a condition and what isn't one. So if you don't fit neatly into those, it gives you another way of identifying and explaining and helping to understand yourself. So I think that is valuable, and yet, you need the formal diagnosis to help you in terms of getting external support. It's a lot easier to get it when you have that. So, but yeah, to me, I think though that's the main reasons why it's important. I know some people feel like they get some relief from, finally understanding why they might be the way they are. But I don't think that's been my experience. I didn't feel like I needed that, and that's, I guess, also because of being a therapist as well.
Yeah.
I know how damaging diagnosis can also be, and how a lot of people don't fit into the criteria, and also because I know that at times then, people can become their diagnosis as well, can't they? And again, then we stop seeing the person, we just see the diagnosis. But I think it can impact an individual as well, that I can't do anything else, I can't be something else because of my diagnosis, and that can be limiting as well. So I don't like diagnosis much, but I can see if you've got to prove your condition, that it can be useful in terms of getting external support. But that's because it's part of the medical model, isn't it? And yeah, so
Yeah, I find that really interesting. The contrast of um how I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but how the
mm,
diagnosis kind of gives you like some sort of external benefit, and the self-diagnosis might be more of an internal one.
mm,
I've thought about the same sort of thing with the concept of disabled, and I
mhm,
remember speaking to a doctor of mine, and I would say I'm disabled, blah blah blah, and she kept saying, differently abled, very nervous, trying to skirt around the word. She didn't want to say it
yeah,
like it was a bad word, and I was like, I've already said I'm disabled. I'm saying it in a comfortable way, not like sort of like I'm feeling bad about myself. So I'm not sure what was happening there. And it made me realize that like the concept of disabled, I use it in two different ways. Sometimes I'm identifying as it, and that's me with my identity with my body, and
mhm,
other times it's my experience of my body interacting with the world. So
mhm,
maybe if I don't usually identify my autism as a disability,
yeah,
but I would understand that it's functionally disabling being autistic in a world that's not catered to it. So my identity is not disabled in that sense, but my experience is disabled. And with my physical disabilities, I also have a similar sort of almost contradictory experience. With that same word, I use it in different ways based
mm,
on the external versus the internal experience of that. I do find that very interesting. And I think maybe going back to what we were saying about the concept of neurodiversity, it goes back more into that internal part of our experience of ourselves, maybe a little bit more, or it like prioritizes that more.
yes, yeah, yeah. No, that is really interesting, isn't it? Thinking about it like that, with the external and internal. Yeah.
Maybe some
Um.
research for the future.
Yeah. Yes. I was thinking that when you were talking, actually. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah.
So the next question is kind of a awkward one because again, you're not diagnosed, and the diagnosis doesn't have the same value for you as it might for certain people. So,
Mm-hmm.
how would you disclose your neurodivergence in this situation? I'm assuming you might need to express specific needs. How would you make sure that they're um, valued properly, understood? Um, and how comfortable are you disclosing like access needs?
Um, I think um well I very rarely disclose because I think I've felt for such a long time um that I can manage any needs myself.
Hmm.
Um and I'm completely aware of um the whole thing around reasonable adjustments, etc. But I think for a long time I didn't actually know what my needs were.
Mm,
So I didn't see any value in disclosing because I didn't know what to ask for, or if there was any way to kind of mitigate or provide adjustments around that. So I think I've just got it very used to masking, to coping in other ways myself, um, and I think yeah, I'm more comfortable now disclosing with like-minded people and some friends, but I don't feel it's had enough of an impact at work to sort of warrant putting different adjustments in place until up until now anyway. So I haven't really seen the need to disclose because of that.
mm.
Yeah. But I think that has changed a little bit, sort of as my awareness has grown and um yeah, and just better understanding around um neurodiversity in general, I think as well. Because I think still we talk about reasonable adjustments. I know there's a lot of places where they still don't talk about it. But I think there's a big expectation on the individual to know exactly what they need, and a lot of people don't know. And then if you don't know, there's no chance of getting anything put in place because um, yeah, I think there's still too little known about
Mm.
things, and even if you work with someone else who's neurodivergent, their needs are going to be probably completely different. So it is something that needs more awareness around and more education around, I think, as well, about what does it even mean to need certain things, be able to ask for them, to be able to know. And again, I think things like the neurodiversity course that we have helps to sort of start having those conversations um, as well, and and to start thinking about what things we can put in place, and yeah, just the whole topic, I guess, really, that we need to have those conversations more.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I think the Neurodiversity Network is such a great addition to the networks at Arden because th nowadays the first thing I recommend to someone if they think they might have a certain condition is just to immediately seek out the community. If they identify with people there, that's probably a good sign, and if they don't, they still might learn
Mm-hmm.
good coping mechanisms. And I've never really gotten good coping mechanisms from professionals. They'll know what's recommended, which is very limited. just like the criteria for diagnosis, but the creative coping strategies, that's what you get from the community. And
Hmm.
you don't need to be you don't need to have the same neurotype to have the same coping strategies, which obviously is why the neurodiversity network is open to anybody. I'm
Yes. Yeah,
pretty sure we've had,
exactly.
neurotypical people or people that, believe they're neurotypical, maybe they're not, but they're like, oh, this thing helps me too. I might try that. Um, because at the end of the day, these access needs are universal, and it's just,
Yes.
you know, finding what works for you as an
Hmm.
individual.
Absolutely. And you don't know what you don't know as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we always talk about when we're talking about accessibility that it benefits everybody because, like
Yeah.
you say, you don't know necessarily, and then you see something being done different, and you think, oh, actually, that's really useful, um, and yeah, that you didn't perhaps previously know. So I think you're right there with the network. It's just a great way to share that knowledge and ideas and support um, amongst different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
What do you wish people knew about neurodivergent individuals?
That's a really good question. um, I guess what would I like people to know? Um, I guess that everybody is unique,
Mm,
and yeah, I think that is the most important. But like you see it everywhere that if you meet one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person,
mm,
and I know that that can be really frustrating because some people think, okay, I'm going to learn about diversity, um, and then find out everybody's different. It's like, how can I learn then if everyone's different? It's much harder to learn rather than we can just put all these traits on different people and learn it like that. But I think so. Yeah, I think it is really important to be aware of the uniqueness, but also that the best thing is to talk to if you want to know about neurodiversity and that particular person, the best way is to talk to them, and that's the best way to find out.
with regards to accessibility, there's sometimes I've seen people say, there's too many conditions, there's no way to make things accessible because everybody's got contradictory needs. Like if you're trying to make a site have accessible text, you might make it bigger for someone that needs things bigger, but then if it's too big, certain people with visual impairment will not be able to see that either.
Hmm.
Um, everyone's needs are contradictory, and that's fine. That means there's no perfect way to make things accessible. It does mean that we need that flexibility, and um, that is a mindset. And coming at people like, okay, you have specific needs that are your own. Let's just figure out what your needs are. Let's be creative with that and flexible with that. That's
Yeah.
the best approach, and it's the easiest approach to manage very complex needs.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with that. The flexibility is really, really important, and I think part of the issue with we might have experts in autism or experts in dyslexia, but because of the co-occurrence, it is so important to have people who know about neurodiversity as a whole.
Mm.
Um, and I know there are more people who do have that understanding now, um, but still in a lot of places there are specialists in certain areas, and that is an issue as well, isn't it? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a problem when we try to become um mm, well, I mean, wanting to be an expert is good, but you can't really be an expert in this kind of thing. You can't fully understand a very specific neurotype when you've separated the person, like
Hmm.
a part of their experience from the rest of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that again is part of the medical model, isn't it?
Mm,
Um, but I mean, I guess I was thinking things like, I don't know, in schools, there might be somebody who has knowledge around certain conditions or one condition in particular, and uh, and doesn't have that broader understanding of all the different conditions and how it might be co-occurrence between them,
Mm.
which obviously is an issue as well. Yeah, but yeah, I get what you're saying about the just even the notion of experts, and yeah, there's experts with experience, isn't there, as well, which is obviously the most valuable um, in especially in something like neurodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that experts by experience become more recognized and um, more valued than they
Mm.
are right now. Certificates kind of trump lived experience right now, and I hope that changes.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and I mean we thought about that quite a lot on the PG cert in neurodiversity, thinking about inclusive research, and I know that's obviously really factored into the research we're doing, that
Mm.
it's that we make the research as inclusive as we possibly can, um, and also looking at techniques and ways that can really be promoted, I think is really, really important.
Mm. What advice would you give to other people that are in your position? So, like a self-diagnosed, I suppose, neurodivergent researcher and therapist and lecturer.
Yes, it's lots of different things there, isn't there? Yeah, I mean, um, I think just finding more out about neurodiversity is the first thing, and obviously there is the PG cert in neurodiversity. That's a great starting point to find out more, and it's relevant to everybody whether you are neurodivergent or not, because so many people do identify as neurodivergent. So it's just something we need to be incorporating into everything we do, building in that accessibility and flexibility to make sure everything's inclusive. So I think that's sort of the key thing first of all, and I think also as a therapist, I mean, I'm also doing some research into working with neurodivergent individuals in therapy as well, because there's not a lot of
Mm.
research on that, and yeah, just looking at potential um, differences and different ways of working that might not fit in with some therapeutic models, for instance, as they stand. So yeah,
Mm.
so I think whether you work in education or any other workplace, criminal justice system, or in a therapeutic setting, you need to have that um, that knowledge around neurodiversity. So I think it is really key to gain that knowledge, and to help build that into your work and your practice, and also working alongside other colleagues who may or may not be neurodivergent. um, it's important to learn more about it, and I think there is a lot more emphasis on neurodiversity now,
Mm.
than there ever has been, which is amazing and really important. Um, but but yeah, I think there's still a lot of people who need to know more, and or think it's not relevant to them. But we know there's like 1 in 4 people are neurodivergent, and it's probably more than that. So it is relevant, and I think also in terms of, I know I'm flitting between, but just sort of thinking in a more therapeutic setting, there's there's a whole thing around trauma and neurodiversity,
Mm.
which again is an area that another research opportunity. Um, that needs to be looked into, and a lot of people don't understand. So I think that's another big area that needs to be focused on as well.
Yeah, this is relevant to everybody really, because like I said, with trauma, anybody can become traumatized, and they would be neurodivergent while dealing with that, whether
Hmm.
it goes away or not. There's other types of acquired neurodivergence, like
Yeah.
traumatic brain injury or Parkinson's or something like that.
Hmm.
The the learning about neurodiversity does mean learning about yourself and everybody else. It's not learning about a small group of people that
No.
have very, niche needs.
Yeah.
It's
Or,
about learning about all of our needs and
hmm.
all of the ways we can be. And, I think everybody would learn something about themselves from researching this stuff. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is about all of us. Neurodiversity is about every single human anyway.
Hmm.
Breaking down that kind of mindset of putting barriers between people, I think would benefit everybody for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
So one last question. What kind of developments would you like to see more of? I'm assuming we've already touched on a couple of pieces of research and like resources, the toolkit, for example.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So some of the research areas, and then you know obviously the research that we're doing around experiences, that's something I'd I'd like to see more of that, and the toolkit that we're going to put together, um, and just making that accessible to everybody so that people feel more supported, whether it's because they're working with colleagues who are neurodivergent or they are themselves, or working with students, um, that it's not just a kind of bolt-on approach anymore, that it's
Mm.
something that we are embedding from the beginning because we know it's valuable to everybody, um, whatever sector you're working in. Yeah, so I think that's really what I would like to see more of, just that we make it much more, that we're a lot more proactive rather than reactive to, oh, this person needs something, they need this need, they need, their needs are not being met, so we'll react and produce something that it's actually there to begin with. um that and I know we can't meet everybody's needs in every situation, but there's a lot we can do to make things more accessible from the beginning. And I think a big part of it is, making sure that people do feel like they belong. If we're just thinking about education, if every module you go into you have to request reasonable adjustments and you have to request everything, you don't feel included, you don't feel like you belong. And so there's a lot of
Yeah.
often small things that we can put in place from the beginning that just make people's experiences a lot more, um, positive, and um, and that they feel included. I think that's really important, especially when we want to foster belonging and connection, between people.
Oh, my cat just meowed. I think she agrees. um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I think I think accessibility and inclusion is not that hard. It is just mostly the approach that
Hmm.
people have, like the environment, the tools. Um, we already have a lot of the tools available, but it's just breaking down the barriers to access them in the first place.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm very excited about this research, and I'm looking forward to when um, it'll be all written up and everyone can see just how much has gone into it and how their
Hmm.
voices have been heard. It'll be
Yes.
a great resource for the university.
Yeah, I think so too. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing your perspective, and hopefully we'll have a lot more people joining into the research.
Yes, thank you. It's been really interesting, and yeah, I hope so too, that we get some more people interested. Thank you.
To our listeners, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening to our podcast and being part of Arden's third Brain Awareness Week celebration. Through these interviews, we explore neurodivergent identity, key ways to mitigate and celebrate neurodivergent needs and skills, and interesting ideas for future brain-related research that some of you listeners might end up being a part of. This year, we have a selection of podcast episodes along with an art competition. If you'd like some more information or a chance to be involved in next year's events, email baw@arden.ac.uk. Once again, a big thank you to all our guests and to the Brain Awareness team who made this podcast possible. And with that being said, take care and hydrate your brains.